I used to deliver across the Great Plains, Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota, trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that this is incredibly flat, like really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was like a retread off of a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was two people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop to see what's going on. At that point, the road layers, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the crap out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. My dad is a long-haul trucker. His creepy, scary story is about how he had to stay overnight at a location pretty common for him. But he was hauling electronics, and in order for him to stay, he had to park in their secured parking lot. It was near Detroit, right in the height of the recession, so things are really bad. The lot was super secure, wire fences, armed guards, massive floodlights. He said the thing that freaked him out was that he was told and guided to park right against a wall. He was allowed out briefly to use the washroom and get water. Otherwise, he was to back in such a way that his cab doors were stuck between two poles so they couldn't open. Windows could though, and that his trailer doors were pressed to the wall. Their last words before he was trapped in the truck all night was, "Keep your curtains closed, ignore any shaking or movement of the truck during the night, ignore any gunshots you may hear. Do not exit the truck unless there is a severe medical emergency. If he needs something, he is to radio on his CB. Otherwise, keep the radio off." Freaked him out that they needed that much security. This was in Michigan. It was about 2 a.m. passing through rural Texas, making a heavy machinery delivery. The route I was taking to this farm was through rural Texas. You know, the type you see in movies that involve a farm in the middle of nowhere, a house every 2 miles, that type of deal. And little did I know, this route I was going to take was about to lead to the scariest, freakiest experience I've ever had. Hands down, period. I have LED light bars on my truck all over the front, so when there's no oncoming traffic, I can see for literally a mile. So I'm driving down the road, minding my own business, when I can see something off in the far distance with my lights, and the closer and closer I get, it looks more and more like a person. About 200 yards from what appears to be a person, I can make out that it's a girl because of the long hair and light-colored clothes she had on. So I slowed down as to not scare this girl walking in the road and turn my brights off so I don't blind her. Truck lights are bright enough as is, so I could see her just fine without it at this point. As I get closer, she turned, and when she did, my CB radio started making some slight static, and as I passed by, I swear she had absolutely no face. Nothing. It looked like a hollow shell. I'm getting antsy just talking about this. I've never flown through gears so fast in my entire life, especially with a heavy load, and I had to be doing at least 70 before I finally came back to my senses. I called the police about it, and the worst part was, they said I'm not the first person to call this in. Through the years, they've had people call it in with similar descriptions of a girl walking down the road in the early morning hours, and when she turns, she has a hollowed out face. The sheriff I talked to told me about an incident that happened years back. A girl in her 20s was struck and killed by a truck speeding down that road in the early morning hours, and it dragged her so far down the road, it ground her face down to nothing on the asphalt. And she was described as having long hair and wearing light-colored clothes, the exact same description as I saw that night. Needless to say, I will never be taking that route again if I have another delivery. Ever. My friend drove for a few years a while back. He told me he was driving a rig very late at night in Utah. He was driving on a lesser-used 2-lane highway. He said he remembers feeling very alert that night, so he noticed what appeared to be a figure manifesting up ahead on the dark road. He told me it wasn't on the road, but just next to it. He then comes to a stop and grabs his heavy-duty flashlight and points it at the figure. Apparently, this humanoid creature had a dead coyote it was eating, and the truck had gotten its attention and made it mad. So it stands up and he gets a full view of this thing. It was gaunt, with very big eyes, and of course the coyote blood all over its face. Its height was about 6'2", and it had skinny limbs with no clothing. He then describes how it started to shuffle slowly towards the truck. Not only does he not have a weapon at that time, the only usable weapon being his flashlight is actively helping him view this creature. He decides to book it and leave, had no problem passing it, turned around to see it standing in the middle of the road on 2 legs as he drove away. When he reaches the nearest rest stop, he sees 2 other truckers talking. Apparently my friend wasn't the only one to see the thing. Both the 2 guys looked as horrified as he was. As for my opinion on my friend's encounter, I have to say my friend isn't one to lie, so his story had me intrigued. I told him maybe what he saw was some mentally ill person out there, but he brushed the idea off, saying he knew what he saw wasn't human. Around 2006, I was driving a flatbed. I picked up a load of construction material in rural Tennessee. My memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville. A tarp was required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere with woods on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. I found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I did a crappy job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. I had to undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load, and start unrolling the tarps again, and I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than, keep an eye on him because I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have straps set in place and am climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working just in case. It's an 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one side and hollow on the other, It's used for tightening straps and chains, etc. Well, the guy gets to me, and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's very patchy. Like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said, screw it, good enough to party. The next thing I notice were his eyes, which I can only describe as off, like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go up all the way. His clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes. I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe, and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah, man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continuing on his way, stops at about the driver's side on my truck, and turns around, comes back to me, and repeats himself. "I've got a long walk." At this point, I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that. I apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this. He turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck, and I start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him, and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck and going back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone. He has his hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving. His other hand is waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and am climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. As soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat, just in case. I look at the guy and realize, okay, he's not talking on a phone. He's talking to his freaking hand, and now I'm nervous because he doesn't look like he's having a nice, pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. I crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. I didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face, with this dead look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I look in the mirror and there's no one there. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these massive dirt areas every 40 miles where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night and closed my blinds and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I heard someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them trying the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain, but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sight. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? Well, after laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck, and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again, and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly, it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hands and stuck it to my window over and over.